Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 5 of organization theory. Let's jump right in. Just quick reminders for what's coming up this week. No discussion forums, but there will be a critical assessment outline of the 4 classical organization theorists that we've been reading. That will be due at the end of the week. Our readings for this week, the agenda includes one chapter from Rainey. That's the impact of political power and public policy. And then we have 2 more readings of classical theorists, one from Max Weber on bureaucracy, and then Luther Gulick, notes on the theory of organization. What I thought I would do this week, maybe a little bit different with this video. We're into this semester a little bit. I've been incredibly impressed with the fact that all of you are doing the readings and obviously doing a very nice job of analyzing, synthesizing across the different readings that we're doing. I've been incredibly impressed with the level of discussion in the Moodle forums. And so rather than me spending a lot of time lecturing and talking about material, I thought what I would do this week is just pull out some quotes and some ideas from all of these readings and try to relate them a little bit to some larger leadership principles, and really challenge you to think a little bit about, how you see these playing out in organizations that you've been engaged with, how you see these ideas fitting into sort of your own leadership style going forward. So let's start with some things that I pulled out of the Rainey chapter for this week. There's a quote, in the absence of economic markets as mechanisms for measuring need and performance, public officials and public organizations often struggle with difficult questions about what the public wants. And so if you're in a government or nonprofit agency, you don't have that, the bottom line, the financial scoreboard really to let you know that you are succeeding, that you're winning the game. And so how do you do that in a public organization? And I think it's an important concept to think about a little bit. I think that the case studies that Academian uses do a nice job of showing how the leaders in each of those 3 programs really engaged their public in a much more participative process. They had a very sort of outward empathetic view of the people they were serving. They had a very customer service oriented approach to things. And so I think the key principle here, and I think going forward, one of the most important things that you'll find in being successful in leading public organizations is that understanding and willingness to engage stakeholders, the people who are part of the organization internally, as well as the clients, the customers, the people that you serve externally, the partners, the people who work with you in the network to provide the services. And so, that participation is a key idea that I wanted to get across with this particular quote. There's talk in this chapter about special interest politics. Rainey says special interest politics pose the danger that the system will become, or has already become, too fragmented into self-interested groups, making it resistant to central coordination and hence unmanageable. And I think we see this. I think that I certainly see that interest groups have become more and more influential, more powerful in guiding public policy. One of the things that I think is a challenge as a public administrator or a leader in an organization is how do you balance that? One of the reasons that special interests tend to have more power is that they can be very focused, they're very well coordinated. Their message may not be as important or any more important than sort of the needs of the general public. But the general public does not have that coordination and that central focus to sort of get their message across with the same level of persuasion and influence. And so think about that as a public administrator. Going forward, how do you think you would approach the strategy of making sure you're balancing the true public interest against the more powerful and dominant special interests that may be trying to influence your organization. There's talk about media relations. This quote, bad press can sledgehammer an agency or an official, damaging budgets, programs, and careers. I've certainly seen this in the last few years here at the University of Montana. Bad publicity, primarily initially around sexual assaults. That sort of got out of control. It did exactly damage the university's budget because it impacted enrollment and it impacted revenue generating opportunities. And it has definitely impacted careers. There's nearly a complete turnover in leadership at the University of Montana over the last 2 or 3 years, primarily driven by media attention and bad press. And so think about that again as a leadership necessity. If you're working in a public organization, you are working in a fishbowl, and there is a lot of scrutiny. And the media can be an ally in getting communication out to your public, but also, and certainly in times of challenges and times of scandal, for certain, the media can be really a difficult relationship to have. And so there's, I think, some pretty good advice in the Rainey book about how to approach media relations. And again, it's a skill that all leaders in public and to some degree nonprofit organizations need to develop. They talk about networks, and Rainey talks about networks. So government policies and programs are increasingly carried out by networks of government agencies, private firms, and nonprofit organizations that are supposed to collaborate in the delivery of program or policy. I had an opportunity just a little over a month ago to deliver some training to the Department of Public Health and Human Services over in Helena. And specifically what they were asking for in this training was some training around systems thinking, and systems thinking as it relates to the delivery of public health. So what has become clear is just what this quote says, is that it no longer really works to have individual kind of siloed hierarchical organizations doing their own thing, especially in something as complex as health, because an individual's health is impacted by the place they work, by the school they go to, by the neighborhood they live in. And so there are so many different organizations across these public and private and nonprofit sectors that play a role in that. And so it's really key as a leader to sort of understand that simply relying on that authority of the hierarchical structure is not enough. You do really have to be able to develop those collaboration skills, those relationship building skills. So one more quote related to this. For all of the networks, cohesion is essential, and the cohesion must be based on trust and mutual respect and consensus building around a common purpose. I think, again, this is one of those big principles that I think is going to drive leadership, certainly in the public sphere into the future, is this idea of leading around common purpose, around a set of shared values, shared vision. And it's maybe not something that is natural for a lot of leaders. I think it tends to be easier to just rely on structural authority, hierarchical authority. But again, that's something that's even internally to organizations is breaking down to some degree, in part, I think, because of new technologies, new abilities for people to communicate across the organization, laterally, diagonals, all different ways, both internally and externally. And so I think I've talked about that a little bit in previous weeks. That hierarchical structure and chain of command and vertical communication doesn't necessarily work now in the environment that we are living in. So think about that a little bit, about how you work with leadership by creating a common purpose. I think I talked a little bit about the team of teams approach last week in the military. And that's a little bit about what they had to do. They had to create that common purpose across all of these different players in the military, different branches of the military and intelligence agencies and that sort of thing. So a couple things just with our classical theorist readings this week. So Max Weber in talking about bureaucracy. I'm not going to go into detail, but these are sort of the the basic tenets of the bureaucratic model that Weber talks about. And obviously these have been incredibly influential and important in the history of organizational theory, and still drive most of what we think about as how organizations operate. But there's one quote that was in this reading that I thought I would bring to your attention and just have you think about a little bit. And it's this one. It's I think it was on page 2 of the reading. In general, bureaucracy segregates official activity as something distinct from the sphere of private life. And so I think that is really important in a lot of ways in terms of separating out public life from private life. One of the things I think I'd like you to think about a little bit is, what are the downsides of that? What have we lost, or what opportunities are we losing when we sort of separate out and think about our lives as two separate things that, and separate that by the time clock. So, the hours that we're at our office, we are one person, and when we go home to our families, we're a different person. I've recently started rereading a book called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux, and I'll bring in some of the ideas a little bit later in the semester when we start talking about sort of the future of organization theory. But one of the things he talks about is that this is one of those sort of dysfunctions of our modern organizations, is that separation of, not bringing our whole selves to the work that we do. He talks about a couple of examples of companies who are working in a self-managing sort of a way and experimenting with some ways to really bring the whole person into work. And so a couple of examples was one company that built a daycare right there within the organization. And so parents who had younger children had their children just down the hall from them, or the children were able to come in and be with them during parts of the day. Another organization that allowed employees to bring their dogs with them. And so one of the things that Laloux talks about is that when you see one of your coworkers in the role of a parent, you maybe see them a little bit differently than if that was outside of what you saw them doing on a day-to-day basis. That it creates a little bit different relationship with that person. Same thing with if a coworker stops to pet your dog at work, there's some sort of a bond there that's created that's not created in any other way. And so think about this a little bit. Obviously, there are reasons why private life and public life things are separated, but again, oftentimes technology is blurring those lines. If you've got a work computer, but with that work computer you can access all kinds of private or public things. With your own private devices you can access work and your private life. And so there's a lot of probably policy that's been in place that's a little bit obsolete because of that. But just again, a mindset that's perhaps a little bit out of date. And then I wanted to one last quote I was going to share from the Gulick piece. A piece of work to be done cannot be subdivided into the obvious component parts without great danger that the central design, the operating relationships, the imprisoned idea will be lost. And so what he's saying here is one of the key elements of doing this division of labor, separating our organizations into these hierarchical structures into these silos, is that it really does create another problem for us in terms of coordinating that work. And so he talks a little bit about the ways that we can go about coordinating our work, and one of them is through that hierarchical structure. And that's really basically what it was designed to do, was that each segment of the organization had its responsibilities, and as you went up through that hierarchical structure, that the level at the top was they were the ones that were coordinating across the organizational boundaries. The other way to coordinate really goes back to what I was talking about earlier, is through this dominance of a single idea, the singleness of purpose, common purpose, shared shared values and vision, that sort of thing. And again, I think you're going to see that this is this approach to collaborating and to being sort of the glue that keeps organizations together and networks of organizations aligned and moving forward together is going to become more and more dominant as the way that work gets done. So think about these things as you are engaging with your organizations. Be aware of which one of these ways of coordinating. These are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And when I talked about the team of teams, the Special Forces in Iraq and Afghanistan example last week, they really did transition sort of to this single purpose idea, but that didn't mean that the hierarchical structure went away. There was still that hierarchy. It just operated a little bit differently. So that's it for this week. One more thing I was going to mention or share was this last quote: "Interrelated elements of time and habit are extraordinarily important in coordination. Man is a creature of habit." So another leadership thing that I'm going to talk about a little bit more as we go through the semester is this idea of habits. And I've for a long time really thought of organizational culture as sort of the collective habits of the organization. It's a little bit more than that, but I think it is important to understand kind of at an individual level how habits form, how difficult it is, and sort of techniques for changing habits over a long period of time. And if you understand that, that helps then to change individual habits within an organization and then collectively change those habits. And so something that I'll bring in as another sort of leadership principle that's really tied very closely to the culture theme that we're working with this semester. So I think that's it for this week. Have a great week. Again, great work so far. I've really enjoyed reading and engaging with you in the discussion forums, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks.